I'm Sophia Lauron, 28 years old, and I thought I understood the depths of my sister Rachel's hatred for me. That phone call 3 days before my wedding shattered every remaining illusion I had about family loyalty. Dad's voice was strained as he delivered the devastating news that he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle because Rachel had given him an ultimatum: choose her or choose me, but not both. The silence that followed his decision to abandon me on the most important day of my life was deafening. What I did next would make both of them realize that forcing someone to choose between daughters comes with consequences neither of them had considered. Have you ever been abandoned by family on your most important day because a jealous sibling made them pick sides? Drop your predictions about how I handled this wedding betrayal in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because this family revenge story has a twist that will leave you absolutely speechless. Rachel's hatred for me hadn't started with my wedding announcement. It had been the defining feature of our relationship since the day I was born 18 months after her. While most siblings experience normal rivalry and competition, Rachel's resentment had evolved into systematic sabotage and manipulation designed to destroy my relationships and undermine my happiness at every opportunity. The pattern had been established in childhood and reinforced throughout our lives. When something good happened to me, Rachel would find ways to spoil it, minimize it, or redirect family attention back to herself through crisis creation or emotional manipulation that required immediate intervention and support. My academic achievements were consistently overshadowed by Rachel's manufactured emergencies. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, Rachel chose that week to have a mental health crisis that required family counseling and intensive attention. When I received a full scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university, Rachel's response was to drop out of community college and demand family support for her artistic pursuits. The family dynamic had crystallized around Rachel as the troubled daughter who needed protection and accommodation, while I was the stable achiever whose success was treated as inevitable and therefore less worthy of celebration or attention. Rachel's manipulation of our parents was masterful and systematic, using emotional volatility and threatening behavior to ensure that family resources and attention were redirected toward managing her crises while my needs and achievements were relegated to background considerations. Rachel is more sensitive and needs more support, had been Mom's constant refrain whenever I questioned why family celebrations became focused on Rachel's emotional needs rather than the achievements being celebrated. Sophia is strong and independent, so she can handle disappointment better than Rachel, Dad would add, creating a narrative where accommodating Rachel's demands was protection while disappointing me was character building. The psychological manipulation had been devastating throughout my 20s, as Rachel systematically targeted my romantic relationships with lies, interference, and emotional manipulation designed to create conflict and drive away potential partners. My college boyfriend had broken up with me after Rachel convinced him that I'd been cheating, providing fabricated evidence and emotional testimony about my supposed infidelity that destroyed a 3-year relationship I'd hoped might lead to marriage. I was just trying to protect him from getting hurt, Rachel had explained when her lies were eventually exposed. Sophia isn't ready for serious relationships, and I thought he should know about her commitment issues. The justification of relationship sabotage as protective intervention was typical of how Rachel reframed her malicious behavior as concern for other people's well-being rather than acknowledging her systematic efforts to destroy my happiness. Rachel's interference had continued through multiple relationships, with each new partner subjected to campaigns of misinformation and emotional manipulation designed to create doubt about my character and commitment to the relationship. When I'd started dating Michael 2 years earlier, Rachel's sabotage campaign had been particularly aggressive and sophisticated, involving social media manipulation, staged encounters, and elaborate lies designed to convince him that I was unstable and unreliable as a romantic partner. Sophia has always been jealous of my relationships, Rachel had told Michael during one of her concerned sister conversations. She tends to get obsessive and possessive when she's dating someone, and I'm worried about how that might affect your relationship." The projection of her own obsessive and manipulative behavior onto me while positioning herself as the concerned family member was classic Rachel manipulation, designed to plant seeds of doubt while appearing to be helpful and supportive. But Michael had been different from previous boyfriends, more mature, more perceptive, and less susceptible to Rachel's emotional manipulation and manufactured drama. His professional background in psychology had given him insights into family dynamics and manipulation tactics that made him resistant to Rachel's interference campaigns. "Your sister seems to have some concerning patterns in how she talks about you," Michael had told me after several encounters with Rachel's concern about our relationship. "Her behavior suggests jealousy and manipulation rather than genuine family care." Michael's ability to recognize Rachel's manipulation had protected our relationship and eventually led to our engagement, which had triggered the most aggressive sabotage campaign Rachel had ever launched against my happiness and family relationships. The engagement announcement had been met with surface congratulations and underlying hostility that quickly evolved into systematic attempts to undermine wedding planning and family support for our celebration. "Are you sure Sophia is ready for marriage?" Rachel had asked our parents repeatedly. "She's never shown much emotional maturity or commitment in previous relationships." The questioning of my readiness for marriage while ignoring her role in sabotaging previous relationships was typical of Rachel's ability to rewrite history and manipulate family perceptions to serve her narrative about my character flaws and relationship limitations. Rachel's campaign against my wedding had included interference with vendor relationships, attempts to sabotage planning decisions, and systematic efforts to turn family members against supporting our celebration through emotional manipulation and manufactured drama. "Sophia is being bridezilla about the wedding planning," Rachel had told relatives who asked about family involvement. "She's making impossible demands and excluding family from important decisions." The characterization of my desire for input into my own wedding planning as bridezilla behavior was designed to justify family members' reduced enthusiasm and support while positioning Rachel as the reasonable family member dealing with my difficult personality. But Rachel's most devastating manipulation had been the systematic campaign to turn Dad against walking me down the aisle, using emotional blackmail and ultimatum tactics to force him to choose between his daughters in a way that would publicly humiliate me on my wedding day. The phone call where Dad had delivered Rachel's ultimatum, and his decision to abandon me rather than risk losing Rachel's relationship, had been the culmination of months of manipulation designed to ensure that my wedding day would be damaged by family conflict and public rejection. "Rachel says she can't be in the same space as you without having panic attacks," Dad had explained during that devastating conversation. "She's given me an ultimatum about choosing between you, and I can't risk losing my relationship with her." The suggestion that Rachel's manufactured emotional distress took precedence over my need for family support on my wedding day was the final confirmation that her manipulation campaign had succeeded in turning Dad into a weapon against my happiness and family relationships. The phone call that shattered my wedding dreams came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 72 hours before my ceremony was scheduled to begin. Dad's voice carried the uncomfortable tone he used when delivering bad news that he knew would devastate me, but had already accepted as inevitable. "Sophia, sweetheart, we need to talk about Saturday's wedding," Dad began with the careful phrasing of someone who'd rehearsed difficult conversation multiple times. "There's been a development with Rachel that's going to affect my participation in your ceremony." The formal way he referenced my participation, rather than walking his daughter down the aisle, was the first indication that this conversation would be different from normal family wedding planning discussions. My immediate assumption was that Rachel had created some kind of crisis that would require family attention during my wedding weekend, which had been her pattern throughout my life whenever important events were scheduled that might take focus away from her needs and emotional drama. "Dad, what kind of development?" I asked, hoping that whatever Rachel had manufactured could be managed around my wedding rather than requiring major changes to family participation in the ceremony. The pause that followed was longer than necessary for simple explanation, suggesting that Dad was struggling with how to present information that he knew would be devastating and potentially relationship-ending. "Rachel has given me an ultimatum about Saturday," Dad said finally, his voice reflecting resignation rather than outrage about being forced to choose between his daughters. "She says she can't handle being around you and the wedding stress, and she's told me that I have to choose between supporting her mental health or participating in your ceremony." The clinical way he presented Rachel's emotional manipulation as legitimate mental health concerns revealed how completely she'd managed to reframe her jealousy and sabotage as psychological necessity that required family accommodation and protection. "Dad, what exactly is Rachel's ultimatum?" I asked, needing specific information about what kind of choice he was being forced to make and what the consequences would be for my wedding celebration. His explanation was devastating in its casual acceptance of Rachel's manipulation, and his willingness to abandon me rather than challenging her inappropriate demands and emotional blackmail tactics. "Rachel says that if I walk you down the aisle, she'll cut off all contact with me permanently," Dad explained, as if this was reasonable family negotiation rather than psychological manipulation designed to damage my wedding and humiliate me publicly. "She's having severe anxiety about the wedding and your relationship with Michael, and she feels that family participation in the ceremony would be endorsing a marriage that she believes will end badly." The suggestion that Rachel's anxiety about my marriage created legitimate grounds for preventing Dad from walking me down the aisle was breathtaking in its manipulation and emotional terrorism. "Dad, Rachel doesn't get to decide whether my marriage will be successful or whether you participate in my wedding," I said, hoping that stating the obvious might help him recognize the inappropriateness of her demands and his consideration of compliance. But Dad's response revealed that he'd already accepted Rachel's framing of the situation as mental health crisis rather than recognizing it as systematic manipulation designed to destroy my wedding day and family relationships. "Sophia, Rachel is genuinely struggling with anxiety and depression related to family changes and your wedding," Dad said, apparently believing that mental health terminology justified any behavior or demand regardless of its impact on other family members. "I can't risk losing my relationship with her by ignoring her psychological needs and forcing her into situations that trigger panic attacks and emotional breakdowns." The characterization of my wedding as a trigger for Rachel's psychological distress was particularly manipulative because it positioned my happiness as a threat to her well-being while making Dad responsible for choosing between daughters based on who appeared more vulnerable. "Dad, has it occurred to you that Rachel might be manipulating this situation to ruin my wedding day?" I asked, hoping that direct confrontation about her pattern of sabotage might penetrate the psychological manipulation she'd deployed to control his decision-making. His response was immediate defense of Rachel rather than consideration of her manipulation history or the timing of her ultimatum just days before my wedding ceremony. "Sophia, Rachel isn't manipulative. She's struggling with genuine mental health challenges that require family support and understanding," Dad replied, apparently having completely forgotten years of Rachel's systematic sabotage and emotional manipulation of family relationships. "I know this is disappointing for you, but Rachel's psychological well-being has to take priority over wedding traditions and ceremonial expectations." The suggestion that walking his daughter down the aisle was mere tradition rather than important family milestone and expression of support was revealing about how Rachel had managed to minimize the significance of my wedding while elevating her emotional manipulation to crisis status. "Dad, so you've decided not to walk me down the aisle because Rachel doesn't want you to?" I asked, needing absolute clarity about his decision and the reasoning behind abandoning me on the most important day of my life. "Sophia, I've decided that maintaining my relationship with Rachel is more important than participating in one ceremony," Dad said, apparently believing that my wedding was just one event rather than a milestone that would define our relationship permanently. "You'll have a beautiful wedding regardless of whether I'm there, but if I lose Rachel over this, that relationship might be damaged forever." The casual dismissal of my wedding as something that would be beautiful, regardless, of his absence while treating Rachel's threats as permanent relationship consequences, was the final confirmation that her manipulation campaign had succeeded completely. The conversation ended with Dad apparently believing that he'd made a reasonable decision based on family mental health considerations, while I processed the reality that my own father had chosen Rachel's emotional manipulation over supporting me on my wedding day. The devastation was immediate and complete, transforming my wedding from celebration of love and family into public demonstration of abandonment and rejection by the family member whose support had been most important to me. But as I processed the magnitude of Dad's betrayal and Rachel's successful sabotage of my wedding day, I began planning a response that would ensure both of them understood the consequences of forcing someone to choose between daughters, and the price of prioritizing manipulation over genuine family relationships. The wedding they'd tried to damage with their ultimatum and abandonment was about to become a demonstration of how family support could be replaced by chosen family and authentic relationships that celebrated rather than sabotaged happiness and success. The 72 hours between Dad's abandonment and my wedding ceremony were filled with devastating emotional processing and strategic planning that would transform my wedding from potential family disaster into powerful demonstration of authentic support versus manipulative control. The pain of paternal rejection was immediately followed by determination to ensure that my special day would be beautiful despite their sabotage attempts. My first call was to Michael, whose response was immediate outrage at Dad's decision and Rachel's manipulation campaign that had succeeded in weaponizing family relationships against our wedding celebration. "Sophia, I'm so sorry that your father chose Rachel's manipulation over supporting you," Michael said, his voice reflecting genuine anger about family dynamics that prioritized emotional terrorism over legitimate celebration and milestone recognition. "But I want you to know that this changes nothing about our wedding or how meaningful it will be," Michael continued with the supportive strength that had made him resistant to Rachel's previous sabotage attempts. "We'll create something even more special because it will represent our chosen family rather than people who use ultimatums to control family relationships." Michael's immediate pivot from disappointment to solution-focused planning was exactly the partnership strength that had convinced me he was the right person to marry despite Rachel's systematic attempts to destroy our relationship. My second call was to Uncle David, Dad's brother, whose response to learning about the ultimatum and abandonment was immediate disgust at both Rachel's manipulation and Dad's weakness in capitulating to emotional blackmail rather than supporting his daughter's wedding. "Sophia, this is completely unacceptable," Uncle David said with genuine outrage. "Rachel has been manipulating family relationships for years, and your father should have recognized this ultimatum as inappropriate control rather than legitimate mental health concern." Uncle David's validation of my assessment was gratifying and important for confirming that external observers recognized Rachel's behavior as manipulation rather than accepting the mental health justification that Dad had used to explain his abandonment. "I would be honored to walk you down the aisle if you'd like family representation for that tradition," Uncle David continued, offering exactly the kind of support that Dad should have provided instead of capitulating to Rachel's emotional terrorism. The offer to replace Dad in the wedding ceremony was meaningful and practical, ensuring that family tradition could be maintained while demonstrating that authentic family support was available from relatives who recognized manipulation and refused to enable it. But my response to family abandonment was going to be more comprehensive and strategic than simple replacement of Dad with Uncle David, though I gratefully accepted his offer to walk me down the aisle. The wedding program was redesigned to include a dedication section that would educate all attendees about the family dynamics that had led to Dad's absence while celebrating the chosen family and authentic relationships that had provided support throughout the wedding planning process. This ceremony celebrates not only the union of Sophia and Michael, but also the power of chosen family and authentic relationships over manipulation and conditional love. Read the program dedication that would be distributed to 200 wedding guests. While some family members chose ultimatums over celebration, the presence of everyone here today demonstrates that true support comes from people who celebrate happiness rather than sabotaging it through emotional control and manufactured crises. The program dedication would ensure that every wedding guest understood exactly why Dad was absent, and that his abandonment reflected his choices rather than Sophia's family relationship failures or wedding planning inadequacies. The ceremony itself was restructured to highlight chosen family and authentic support while acknowledging the pain of biological family abandonment without allowing it to diminish the celebration or significance of the milestone being marked. Uncle David's participation, as father figure, was introduced with explanation about family support coming from people who understood the difference between authentic care and emotional manipulation designed to control other people's happiness and life choices. Today we celebrate Sophia and Michael's union with the support of family and friends who understand that true love means celebrating each other's happiness rather than using ultimatums and emotional manipulation to control important life moments, the officiant announced during the ceremony introduction. The wedding reception included a toast segment where multiple family members and friends would share their perspectives on authentic family relationships, and they discussed Dad's abandonment and Rachel's manipulation campaign that had succeeded in damaging what should have been purely celebratory family milestone. To Sophia and Michael, whose love has survived family sabotage and emotional manipulation, Uncle David toasted during the reception. And to everyone here who understands that supporting each other's happiness is what family actually means. The wedding photography was specifically planned to document the celebration and joy that existed despite Dad's absence, creating permanent record of how meaningful the day had been with chosen family and authentic support rather than biological relatives who prioritized manipulation over celebration. But the most strategic element of my wedding response was the decision to live stream the ceremony for extended family and community members who would witness both the beauty of the celebration and the obvious absence of Dad, along with explanations about why family support had been withdrawn through ultimatums and emotional blackmail. The live stream would reach hundreds of people in our community, who would see firsthand how beautiful and meaningful the wedding was despite family abandonment, while also understanding exactly why Dad wasn't present and how Rachel's manipulation had succeeded in damaging family relationships. Social media documentation of the wedding would include direct references to overcoming family sabotage and emotional manipulation, while creating beautiful celebrations with people who genuinely supported the couple's happiness and success. When family members use ultimatums to control your happiness, chosen family steps in to provide the love and support that biological relatives withheld, would be the caption on wedding photos that showed Uncle David walking me down the aisle while Dad's absence was conspicuously obvious. The combination of program dedications, ceremony explanations, reception toasts, and social media documentation would ensure that Dad's abandonment and Rachel's manipulation became public knowledge throughout our community while demonstrating that their sabotage had failed to diminish the wedding or damage the celebration. As my wedding day approached with comprehensive planning for handling family abandonment while creating meaningful celebration, I felt confident that Dad and Rachel would both understand the consequences of their choices and the public nature of their decision to prioritize manipulation over family support. The morning of my wedding dawned with perfect September weather and a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with traditional wedding nerves. I felt genuinely excited about marrying Michael and celebrating our relationship with people who demonstrated authentic support throughout our engagement, while Dad's absence felt like liberation from manipulation rather than devastating abandonment. Uncle David arrived early for our pre-ceremony conversation, bringing flowers and emotional support that demonstrated exactly the kind of family love that Dad had chosen to withhold in favor of accommodating Rachel's manipulation campaign. Sophia, I want you to know that walking you down the aisle today is one of the greatest honors of my life, Uncle David said with genuine emotion. Your father's decision to abandon you is his loss and his shame, not your failure or disappointment. The validation from family members who understood manipulation and refused to enable it was healing and empowering, confirming that Dad's absence reflected his character flaws rather than my inadequacy as a daughter or bride. The bridal suite was filled with friends and chosen family who'd provided support throughout wedding planning while biological family had been conspicuously absent, or actively sabotaging the celebration through emotional manipulation and ultimatum tactics. "You look absolutely radiant," my maid of honor Jessica told me as we completed final preparations. "This day is going to be perfect because everyone here genuinely loves and supports you, which is what weddings should actually be about." The contrast between authentic excitement from friends versus family drama and manipulation was stark and confirming about the wisdom of prioritizing relationships based on support rather than biological obligation. The ceremony venue was decorated beautifully and filled with 200 guests who'd come to celebrate our marriage rather than create drama or impose ultimatums on family participation and support. As I prepared to walk down the aisle with Uncle David, I felt genuine gratitude for family members who understood appropriate boundaries and authentic care rather than emotional manipulation and control tactics. "Are you ready to show everyone what real family support looks like?" Uncle David asked as we positioned ourselves for the processional that would begin my ceremony without Dad, but with much more meaningful family representation. The walk down the aisle was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Meaningful, emotional, and surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our love rather than viewing it as threat to family dynamics or opportunity for manipulation and control. Uncle David's presence was dignified and appropriate, representing family tradition and support while demonstrating that authentic care was available from relatives who prioritized celebration over manipulation. The ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful, with vows that referenced overcoming external challenges and building partnership based on mutual support rather than control and emotional manipulation. Michael and Sophia have demonstrated that authentic love can overcome family sabotage and emotional manipulation, the officiant noted during the ceremony. Their commitment represents triumph over people who use relationships as weapons rather than sources of support. Have you ever had your most important day become more meaningful because toxic family members removed themselves from your celebration? When you realized their absence was actually a gift that allowed authentic joy without manipulation and drama? Share your experiences with family boundary setting in the comments below, because what happened during our reception would prove that choosing authentic relationships over biological obligation creates much more genuine celebration. The wedding reception was filled with toasts and speeches that celebrated authentic family relationships, while acknowledging the strength required to maintain boundaries against manipulation and emotional terrorism designed to control important life decisions. To Sophia, who showed incredible strength in planning a beautiful wedding despite family members who tried to sabotage her happiness, toasted my college friend Amanda. And to Michael, who recognized manipulation and refused to let it damage their relationship. Extended family members who attended the wedding expressed genuine shock at Dad's absence and disgust at the ultimatum tactics that had been used to force his abandonment of paternal responsibilities and traditional family support. "I can't believe Richard chose Rachel's manipulation over walking his daughter down the aisle," Aunt Margaret told other relatives during the reception. "This decision will define their relationship permanently, and not in a positive way." The community response to Dad's absence was exactly what I'd anticipated: widespread recognition that his behavior was inappropriate and damaging rather than reasonable accommodation of Rachel's psychological needs or mental health considerations. Wedding guests who learned about the family dynamics expressed support for my decision to proceed with celebration despite family abandonment, while criticizing relatives who'd used ultimatums to control participation in important milestones. "Your wedding is absolutely beautiful, and your father's absence is his loss entirely," multiple guests told me throughout the reception. "Anyone who chooses manipulation over supporting their daughter's wedding doesn't deserve to be part of such a meaningful celebration." The social media response to wedding photos and live stream coverage was overwhelmingly supportive of our celebration, while critical of family members who'd withdrawn support through emotional manipulation and ultimatum tactics. This is what family should look like. People who celebrate your happiness instead of trying to control it through threats and emotional blackmail, was typical of comments on wedding photos that showed Uncle David walking me down the aisle while Dad's absence was conspicuously obvious. The wedding photography captured genuine joy and celebration that existed without family drama or manipulation, creating permanent record of how meaningful the day had been despite attempts to damage it through ultimatums and abandonment. But the most satisfying aspect of the wedding day was the complete absence of Rachel's predicted drama and emotional manipulation, since her ultimatum had removed both her and Dad from the celebration entirely. Without Rachel's presence to create manufactured crises or emotional scenes designed to redirect attention from the couple to her psychological needs, the wedding proceeded smoothly and joyfully from ceremony through reception. The live stream that had been intended to document family abandonment instead captured a beautiful celebration filled with authentic support and genuine happiness that demonstrated how much more meaningful events could be without manipulative family members creating drama and emotional terrorism. As Michael and I concluded our reception and prepared to leave for our honeymoon, I reflected on how Dad's abandonment had actually improved our wedding by removing sources of manipulation and control while highlighting the authentic family and chosen relationships that genuinely supported our happiness. The wedding that Rachel had tried to sabotage through ultimatums and Dad's abandonment had instead become demonstration of how authentic celebration was possible when toxic family members removed themselves from important milestones and life events. The week following our wedding was filled with aftermath from Dad's public absence and the community's response to learning about the ultimatum that had forced him to abandon his paternal responsibilities on my most important day. The social consequences were swift and comprehensive, affecting Dad's reputation and relationships throughout our community while validating my decision to proceed with celebration despite family manipulation. Dad's business relationships were immediately impacted by community knowledge of his wedding abandonment, with clients and colleagues expressing shock that he'd chosen ultimatum compliance over supporting his daughter's marriage and family milestone. Richard's absence from Sophia's wedding has been the talk of our networking group, reported Uncle David after his Monday morning business meeting. People are questioning his character and judgment when family pressure can force him to abandon his daughter on her wedding day. The professional consequences were appropriate and significant, since Dad's business success had been built partly on community reputation and social relationships that were now damaged by public knowledge of his family abandonment and weakness in the face of emotional manipulation. Extended family members who'd attended the wedding were sharing their perspectives about Dad's absence and Rachel's manipulation campaign with relatives who hadn't witnessed the celebration firsthand, creating widespread family awareness of the dynamics that had led to paternal abandonment. Richard let Rachel manipulate him into abandoning Sophia on her wedding day, Aunt Margaret explained to relatives who'd questioned his absence. The ultimatum was completely inappropriate, and his compliance was devastating to Sophia and embarrassing for the entire family. The family consensus was overwhelmingly critical of Dad's decision and Rachel's manipulation, with relatives expressing disgust at ultimatum tactics and emotional blackmail designed to damage wedding celebrations and family relationships. Church community members who'd known our family for years were particularly shocked by Dad's abandonment, since his public persona had been built around family values and parental responsibility that were contradicted by his behavior toward my wedding. "We couldn't believe Richard wasn't at Sophia's wedding," multiple church members told Mom during Sunday service. His absence was so conspicuous that everyone was asking what could possibly keep a father from walking his daughter down the aisle. The religious community's response was exactly what I'd anticipated. Widespread recognition that Dad's behavior violated fundamental principles about family support and parental obligations that couldn't be justified by ultimatum compliance or mental health considerations. Mom's social isolation was beginning as friends and community members learned about her role in enabling Rachel's manipulation and failing to oppose Dad's abandonment of his paternal responsibilities during my wedding planning. "People are asking me why I didn't intervene when Rachel gave your father that ultimatum," Mom admitted during one of our tense post-wedding conversations. I'm having difficulty explaining why we allowed her manipulation to damage your wedding day. The community pressure on Mom was appropriate consequence for her passive enabling of Rachel's emotional terrorism and her failure to protect one daughter from another daughter's systematic sabotage and manipulation campaigns. Rachel's reputation was suffering severe damage as extended family and community members learned about her ultimatum tactics and emotional manipulation designed to force Dad's abandonment of wedding participation and family support. Rachel's behavior was completely inappropriate and manipulative, became the consistent assessment from people who learned about her ultimatum and its successful sabotage of family wedding participation. The social consequences for Rachel were particularly significant because her manipulation had been exposed as calculated control rather than legitimate mental health crisis, revealing her systematic pattern of emotional terrorism and family sabotage. Professional colleagues and community members who'd respected Dad's business acumen were re-evaluating their relationships and associations with someone who'd demonstrated such poor judgment about family priorities and susceptibility to emotional manipulation. Richard's decision-making in family situations makes us question his judgment in business relationships, was feedback that reached Dad through professional networks that had previously provided respect and commercial opportunities. The business impact was meaningful and appropriate, since Dad's public abandonment had revealed character flaws that affected professional credibility and trustworthiness in commercial relationships and community leadership roles. But the most significant development was Michael's family's response to learning about Dad's abandonment and the ultimatum tactics that had forced his wedding absence despite my genuine desire for paternal support and traditional family participation. The Lauron family dynamics help us understand why Sophia values authentic relationships and honest communication so highly, Michael's mother told their extended family. Her strength in handling family manipulation shows exactly the kind of character we want in our daughter-in-law. Michael's family's increased respect for me based on my handling of family manipulation was gratifying and important for establishing in-law relationships based on mutual appreciation rather than obligation or social expectation. The wedding weekend had also revealed which extended family members genuinely supported authentic relationships versus those who enabled manipulation and emotional terrorism for the sake of avoiding conflict and maintaining surface harmony. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who'd attended the wedding and witnessed the celebration, despite Dad's absence, were expressing ongoing support for my boundary setting and criticism of family members who'd prioritized Rachel's manipulation over wedding celebration and family milestone recognition. Sophia handled the family situation with incredible grace and strength, was consistent feedback from relatives who'd seen firsthand how meaningful the wedding had been despite attempts to sabotage it through ultimatums and abandonment. The extended family support was validating and important for establishing ongoing relationships based on mutual respect and authentic care rather than biological obligation to tolerate manipulation and emotional terrorism from relatives who used family connections as weapons rather than sources of support. As the social and professional consequences continued affecting Dad's reputation while Rachel's manipulation became widespread community knowledge, I was building new life with Michael based on partnership and mutual support rather than the family dysfunction that had characterized my previous relationships with biological relatives. The honeymoon we'd taken immediately after the wedding had provided perspective and healing that allowed me to process Dad's abandonment as his character failure rather than my inadequacy as daughter, while the community response confirmed that his behavior had been inappropriate and damaging to his own reputation rather than justified accommodation of Rachel's needs. 6 months after my wedding day, the consequences of Dad's abandonment and Rachel's ultimatum manipulation were continuing to reshape family relationships and community standing in ways that validated my decision to proceed with celebration despite their sabotage attempts. The social and professional damage they'd inflicted on themselves had become permanent markers of character and judgment that would follow them indefinitely. Dad's business had suffered significant client losses, As word spread throughout our professional community about his abandonment of paternal responsibilities and his susceptibility to emotional manipulation that could force abandonment of family obligations on important occasions. "We can't work with someone whose family judgment is so poor that ultimatums can force him to abandon his daughter's wedding," explained one former client who'd terminated their consulting relationship after learning about the wedding situation. The business consequences were appropriate and meaningful, since Dad's professional reputation had been built partly on community respect that was now permanently damaged by public knowledge of his character failures and manipulative family dynamics. Mom's social isolation had deepened as friends and community members continued questioning her passive role in enabling Rachel's manipulation, while failing to protect one daughter from another daughter's systematic sabotage campaigns. "Your mother has lost several long-time friendships because people can't understand how she allowed Rachel to manipulate your father into abandoning your wedding," Uncle David reported during one of our regular check-in conversations. The social consequences for Mom were educational about the cost of enabling manipulation and avoiding difficult conversations that might have prevented family disasters and relationship damage. Rachel's reputation had been permanently damaged throughout our community and extended family networks, with her ultimatum tactics and emotional terrorism becoming widely known examples of inappropriate family manipulation and control. "People cross the street to avoid talking to Rachel now," reported cousin Jennifer during a family gathering. "Everyone knows about her manipulation, and nobody wants to be subjected to her emotional blackmail and crisis creation." The comprehensive social rejection Rachel was experiencing was exactly the consequence I'd hoped her manipulation would eventually generate: community recognition of her toxic behavior and appropriate social boundaries around emotional terrorism. My marriage to Michael had flourished without family interference or manipulation, developing into the kind of partnership that Rachel had systematically tried to prevent through sabotage campaigns and relationship interference throughout my dating life. "Not having your family's manipulation and drama in our relationship has allowed us to build something really authentic and strong," Michael told me during our 6-month anniversary dinner. "Your father's abandonment actually protected our marriage from ongoing interference and control attempts." The perspective that family absence had been beneficial rather than devastating was healing and accurate. Dad's abandonment had eliminated ongoing sources of manipulation and conflict that would have continued affecting our relationship if ultimatum tactics had been rewarded with compliance. Professional opportunities for me had expanded as colleagues and clients witnessed my strength in handling family manipulation while maintaining professional competence and personal integrity despite devastating family betrayal. Sophia's grace under pressure during her family crisis showed exactly the kind of character we want in our senior management team, my supervisor explained when offering a promotion 6 months after the wedding. The career advancement that resulted from demonstrating resilience and boundary-setting skills was gratifying and practical, providing financial security and professional recognition that would have been impossible if family manipulation had been allowed to continue affecting my personal and professional development. Extended family relationships had solidified around authentic support and mutual respect rather than biological obligation to tolerate manipulation and emotional terrorism from relatives who used family connections as weapons. Uncle David had become a genuine father figure whose support was based on genuine care rather than genetic connection, while other relatives who'd attended the wedding continued expressing admiration for my boundary setting and criticism of Dad's abandonment. "You've shown our entire family what healthy boundaries look like," Aunt Margaret told me during our holiday celebration. "Your strength in handling Rachel's manipulation has educated all of us about recognizing and refusing to enable emotional terrorism." The family education about manipulation recognition and boundary enforcement was beneficial for everyone who'd witnessed the wedding situation and learned about appropriate responses to ultimatum tactics and emotional blackmail. Community recognition of my character and strength had led to volunteer opportunities and leadership roles that provided meaning and purpose while demonstrating that family abandonment hadn't diminished my social standing or personal value. Sophia Loren represents exactly the kind of community leadership we need, was feedback I received when being nominated for nonprofit board positions and community service recognition. The community respect was validating and important for establishing social relationships based on demonstrated character rather than family connections or genetic associations that might have included manipulation and dysfunction. But the most meaningful development was the complete absence of family drama and manipulation in my daily life, creating space for authentic relationships and personal development that had been impossible when Rachel's interference and Dad's weakness had been ongoing sources of conflict and emotional drain. I never realized how much mental energy I was spending on managing family manipulation until it was gone, I told my therapist during one of our sessions about healing from family abandonment and building healthy relationship patterns. The psychological freedom that came from family boundary enforcement was transformative and enabling, allowing focus on marriage, career, and authentic relationships rather than constant vigilance against manipulation and sabotage from relatives who viewed my happiness as threat to their control and attention needs. As Dad and Rachel continued facing social and professional consequences for their ultimatum tactics and manipulation campaigns, I was building life based on authentic support and mutual respect rather than biological obligation to tolerate emotional terrorism disguised as family love. The wedding they'd tried to sabotage through abandonment and ultimatums had become the catalyst for comprehensive life improvement and relationship enhancement that would have been impossible if their manipulation had been rewarded with compliance and accommodation. 2 years after Dad chose Rachel's ultimatum over walking me down the aisle, I was standing in the maternity ward holding my newborn daughter Emma, named not for spite, but because I wanted to reclaim beauty from the ashes of family destruction. Michael stood beside me, marveling at our perfect child, who would grow up knowing only authentic love and support, never experiencing the manipulation and emotional terrorism that had defined my childhood. Dad's attempts at reconciliation had been sporadic and self-serving, focused more on his social discomfort from community judgment than genuine remorse for abandoning me on my wedding day, or acknowledgement of how his choices had permanently damaged our relationship. Sophia, I know I made mistakes with the wedding situation, but Rachel really was struggling with mental health issues, Dad had said during one of his pathetic attempts at rebuilding our relationship without taking full responsibility for his choices. I hope we can move past this family conflict and restore our relationship for the sake of your marriage and any future grandchildren, he'd continued, apparently believing that my happiness created obligations for me to forgive his betrayal and Rachel's manipulation without requiring accountability or changed behavior. My response to reconciliation attempts was consistent with the boundaries I'd established after the wedding. I was open to relationship restoration when he could acknowledge that his abandonment was wrong and that Rachel's ultimatum should have been rejected rather than accommodated. Dad, I'm willing to discuss rebuilding our relationship when you can take full responsibility for choosing Rachel's manipulation over supporting your daughter's wedding, I replied firmly. Until then, I need to protect myself and my family from people who view ultimatums as acceptable conflict resolution. Rachel's life had continued deteriorating as her manipulation tactics became widely recognized throughout our community, making it impossible for her to build authentic relationships or professional opportunities based on genuine competence rather than emotional control and crisis creation. Her employment history was unstable and problematic, with multiple job losses resulting from workplace conflicts and inappropriate emotional outbursts when colleagues refused to accommodate her drama and attention-seeking behavior. Rachel has been fired from 3 different positions because her emotional manipulation doesn't work in professional settings, Uncle David reported during one of our family updates. Employers recognize her behavior as unprofessional rather than mental health challenges requiring accommodation. The professional consequences were appropriate and educational, forcing Rachel to confront the reality that emotional terrorism might work with family members, but was ineffective in settings where competence and professionalism were required rather than genetic tolerance for manipulation. Mom's journey toward understanding and accountability had been slower, but more genuine than Dad's surface attempts at reconciliation without responsibility acknowledgement. Sophia, I realize now that I failed you by enabling Rachel's manipulation and not protecting you from her ultimatum tactics, Mom admitted during one of our carefully supervised conversations. I was so focused on avoiding conflict that I allowed one daughter to systematically abuse another daughter. Mom's acknowledgement was partial progress toward understanding the family dynamics that had enabled Rachel's emotional terrorism while failing to protect me from systematic sabotage and manipulation throughout my life. I know I can't undo the damage that was done, but I want you to know that I am working to understand how I contributed to Rachel's behavior and your need for such strong boundaries with family, Mom continued with what seemed like genuine remorse and commitment to changed behavior. The therapy work Mom had undertaken to understand her role in family dysfunction was encouraging and suggested that reconciliation might be possible with family members who were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and demonstrate consistent changed behavior over time. Extended family relationships had evolved into chosen family connections based on mutual support and authentic care rather than biological obligation to tolerate manipulation and emotional terrorism from relatives who used genetic connections as weapons. Uncle David had walked me down the aisle at my baby shower, continuing to provide the paternal support that Dad had forfeited through his wedding abandonment and continued refusal to acknowledge the full scope of his betrayal. I'm honored to continue being the grandfather figure that your daughter deserves, Uncle David told me during Emma's christening celebration. Every milestone I get to share with your family is a gift that your father chose to give up. The chosen family relationships were more meaningful and supportive than biological connections had ever been, providing Emma with role models who demonstrated authentic love rather than conditional support based on compliance with ultimatums and emotional manipulation. Michael's family had embraced me completely as their daughter, providing the family acceptance and support that I'd never experienced with my biological relatives, who viewed relationships as opportunities for control rather than sources of mutual care. Sophia has shown us what strength and grace look like when facing family betrayal, Michael's mother told relatives during Emma's first birthday celebration. She's exactly the kind of woman we hoped our son would marry. The in-law relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or social expectation, creating extended family connections that Emma would experience as consistent support rather than conditional love based on behavior compliance. My career had continued advancing with promotions and recognition that reflected professional competence and leadership skills that had been developed partly through managing family crisis and boundary enforcement during personal challenges. Sophia's ability to maintain professional excellence while handling complex personal situations shows exactly the kind of executive presence we need in senior leadership, was feedback from colleagues who'd witnessed my handling of family manipulation while maintaining work quality and team leadership. The professional success was enabling financial security and career satisfaction that provided independence from any potential future family manipulation or emotional terrorism designed to control my decisions through resource dependency or obligation. But the most meaningful aspect of my new life was the complete absence of manipulation, ultimatums, and emotional terrorism in daily interactions with people who supported my happiness rather than viewing it as threat to their control or attention needs. I love that Emma will grow up in a family where love isn't conditional on compliance with other people's emotional manipulation, I told Michael during one of our evening conversations about parenting goals and family values. She'll learn about authentic support and mutual respect rather than the ultimatum tactics and emotional blackmail that characterized the family I grew up in, Michael replied, understanding exactly why family boundaries had been necessary for protecting our marriage and creating healthy environment for raising children. As I looked at our beautiful daughter and reflected on the journey from family abandonment to authentic chosen family, I felt grateful that Dad's wedding betrayal had forced me to discover that real family was about support and celebration rather than genetic connection and manipulation tolerance. Have you ever been abandoned by biological family only to discover that chosen family provides much more authentic love and support? When you realized that their ultimatums actually liberated you from relationships based on control rather than genuine care? Share your experiences with family boundary setting in the comments below, because your courage to choose authentic relationships might inspire someone else who's being manipulated by relatives who mistake DNA for unconditional tolerance. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family boundary and relationship stories. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family abandonment can be the beginning of building much healthier relationships with people who actually value your happiness rather than trying to control it through emotional manipulation. Thank you for joining me on this journey from wedding betrayal to authentic family building, for supporting my decision to choose genuine relationships over biological obligation, and for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing family can do is remove themselves from your life when they can't provide actual support and care. Remember, you don't owe anyone tolerance for ultimatums and emotional manipulation just because you share DNA, and you're not obligated to accept abandonment and betrayal as the price of maintaining relationships with people who view your happiness as threat to their control. You deserve family members who celebrate your milestones rather than sabotaging them through manipulation tactics. The sweetest victory isn't getting revenge on people who betrayed you. The sweetest victory is building a life so authentic and fulfilling that their absence feels like freedom rather than loss, and creating family connections based on genuine support rather than genetic obligation to tolerate emotional terrorism. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let toxic people remove themselves from your life and build something beautiful with people who actually know how to love without conditions or ultimatums.